You've been watching closely, not obsessively, but carefully. Because when you've loved someone who pulls away the moment things get real, you learn to read between the lines. You learn that silence means something, distance means something. Even the smallest change means something. And lately, something feels different. Not dramatic, not cinematic, but subtle, almost fragile. And that's what scares you. Because when you love someone who avoids emotions, you don't trust sudden intensity. You look for patterns. You look for effort. You look for proof that this isn't temporary. And here's the truth most people won't tell you. When an avoidant wants to change for you, it doesn't look loud. It looks uncomfortable. It looks hesitant. It looks like someone fighting themselves just to stay. If you're seeing that fight, this might be what it means. The first sign is this shift you didn't expect. Avoidants don't transform overnight. They don't wake up suddenly expressive and emotionally fluent. Their nervous system doesn't work that way. What happens instead is tension, internal tension. You might notice they pause before pulling away. They hesitate before giving you the cold shoulder. They start replying a little faster. They stay on the call a little longer. They don't disappear the way they used to. That hesitation is not small. That hesitation is a battle. Because their instinct says retreat, protect yourself, this is too much. But something else is whispering, stay, don't lose this. When someone wired for distance begins choosing closeness in small moments, that's not coincidence, that's effort. It might not look romantic, it might look awkward. Maybe they don't have the perfect words, maybe they seem stiff when emotions rise, but they're not running. And if you've ever loved an avoidant, you know how significant that is. You'll feel it in your body. The energy changes. Conversations don't end as abruptly. The walls feel thinner. They're still guarded, yes, but the door isn't slammed shut. It's slightly open. And for someone who built their identity around self-sufficiency, even cracking that door takes courage. Then comes something even more powerful. They start having hard conversations. This is where you really know something is shifting. Avoidants are masters at redirecting. They joke. They intellectualize. They minimize. Anything to avoid sitting in emotional discomfort. So when they look at you and say, we need to talk about what happened, that's not casual, that's intentional. They might stumble through it. Their voice might sound tight. They may struggle to maintain eye contact, but they stay. They don't change the subject. They don't accuse you of being dramatic. They don't shut down halfway through. Do you understand how unnatural that feels for them? Emotional confrontation feels like standing on the edge of a cliff without a harness. It feels like exposure, like losing control. And yet, they're standing there anyway. For you. When someone avoids feelings their whole life, confronting them isn't just uncomfortable, it feels threatening. So if they're initiating conversations about conflict, about miscommunication, about their own behavior, that's growth in motion. It means they're realizing something. They're realizing that protecting themselves at all costs might cost them you. And suddenly the fear of losing you outweighs the fear of emotional intensity. That shift changes everything. And then one day, you hear words you've never heard from them before. I know I shut down, or I realize I push you away. Accountability. For someone who survived by detaching, admitting their pattern feels like admitting weakness. It means lowering the armor. It means acknowledging that the problem isn't always external. That's not easy for someone who built safety around independence. But when they say it, without sarcasm, without blame, without turning it back on you, something inside you softens. Because for the first time, you're not fighting alone. For the first time, they're aware. And awareness is the beginning of change. They may not know how to fix it yet. They may not have all the tools, but they see it. They see themselves. And that self-recognition is terrifying for someone who spent years avoiding introspection. You'll notice the difference in how they respond after that. When tension rises, they might catch themselves mid-withdrawal. They might say, I'm feeling overwhelmed, but I don't want to shut you out. That sentence alone represents an internal revolution. Because before, they would have simply vanished. The fourth sign is subtle but profound. They stay during conflict. You bring up something that hurt you. Normally, this is where the air turns cold, where silence stretches, where they retreat into another room, or into their phone, or into themselves. But this time, they stay. They don't necessarily handle it perfectly. They might look tense. They might need a moment to breathe, but they don't walk away. They don't punish you with distance. They sit there Do you realize what that means? It means they're choosing connection over self-protection. Avoidants equate conflict with engulfment. Their body reacts as if emotional intensity equals danger. So when they remain physically and emotionally present, they are overriding a lifelong survival strategy. That's not small, that's rewiring. You'll see it in their posture, in the way they force themselves to listen, in the way they try to respond instead of escape. They might even say, "I want to understand," and maybe their voice shakes when they say it. That's effort, raw, imperfect effort. And finally, there's something that feels almost unbelievable when it happens. They ask what you need, not defensively, not sarcastically, but genuinely. What would make you feel better? What do you need from me? For someone used to guarding their independence, asking that question means acknowledging that your emotional world matters. It means recognizing that love is not just about space, it's about presence. When they start asking about your needs, they're expanding their capacity. They're stretching beyond comfort. They're learning that closeness doesn't erase them, that intimacy isn't imprisonment. And if you've been loving them patiently, trying not to push too hard, trying to give space while still needing reassurance, this moment feels like oxygen. It doesn't mean everything is fixed. It doesn't mean they'll never retreat again. Change for an avoidant is not linear. There will still be moments of distance, moments of overwhelm. But if you see these 5 shifts, hesitation before pulling away, initiating hard conversations, admitting their struggle, staying during conflict, and asking about your needs, you are not imagining it. This means they are fighting themselves to keep you. And for someone whose instinct is always to run, staying is the loudest declaration of love they know how to make. And when someone whose instinct is always to run begins choosing to stay, something else begins to shift quietly beneath the surface. You start noticing consistency where there used to be confusion, not perfection, not grand gestures, but steadiness. Hot and cold slowly turns into warm and present. The unpredictable rhythm that once kept you anxious begins to soften. They text when they say they will, they call back, they don't disappear for days without explanation. You're not left decoding silence like it's a puzzle you're desperate to solve. Consistency may not sound romantic. It doesn't sparkle. It doesn't sweep you off your feet. But when you've loved someone, avoidant, consistency feels like safety. It feels like exhaling after holding your breath for months. And here's what you have to understand. For someone wired to equate closeness with loss of autonomy, showing up repeatedly requires emotional regulation they've never had to practice before. Every time they choose reliability, they are pushing against an old narrative that says, "Don't let anyone depend on you. Don't let yourself depend on anyone." So when their behavior becomes steady instead of reactive, that's not accidental. That's intention. It's them deciding that the discomfort of commitment is worth the stability of connection. You feel it in small moments. The way your phone lights up and you don't feel dread. The way plans don't feel fragile anymore. The way you start trusting their presence instead of bracing for their absence. That shift means they're not just attached, they're investing. Then comes something deeper, something more intimate than consistency. They start sharing parts of themselves they've never let you see. Avoidants guard their inner world like a locked room. They'll show you competence, humor, strength, independence, but they rarely show you fear, rarely show you the younger version of themselves who learned that needing someone was unsafe. So when they begin to open that door even slightly, you must recognize how sacred that is. Maybe they tell you about a memory that still stings. Maybe they admit they struggle with feeling overwhelmed when someone gets too close. Maybe they confess they're scared of failing you. They won't say it dramatically. It may come out casually, almost disguised, but if you listen closely, you'll hear vulnerability underneath the words. And vulnerability for an avoidant feels like standing without armor. It feels like giving someone the power to wound you. That's why they avoid it. That's why they intellectualize instead of emote. So if they're letting you see their fears, their insecurities, their confusion about their own patterns, that means trust is replacing self-protection. They are no longer just trying to keep you at a safe distance. They're allowing you into the parts of themselves they once hid, even from their own awareness. And when that happens, something shifts inside you too, because you're no longer loving a wall. You're loving a person, a human being who is trying to unlearn years of emotional isolation. That kind of sharing doesn't happen unless they want something real. There's another subtle but powerful sign that change is happening. They stop minimizing your feelings. Before, when you expressed hurt, the response might have been dismissal. You're overthinking. It's not that serious. Why are you making it a big deal? Minimization is a defense. If your feelings are exaggerated, then they don't have to confront their impact. It protects them from guilt. It protects them from emotional responsibility. But when they begin saying, I understand why that hurt you, something profound is happening. Validation requires empathy, and empathy requires emotional presence. When they listen without immediately defending themselves, when they pause instead of interrupting, when they acknowledge your pain without trying to shrink it, that's growth. It means they're learning that your emotions are not threats, they're signals. It means they're recognizing that love is not about being right, it's about being connected. You'll notice the tone shift, the softness, the way they lean in, instead of leaning away. And for you, this feels different than apologies. It feels like being seen. Because the deepest wound in loving an avoidant is not just distance, it's invisibility. It's feeling like your emotions don't land anywhere. So when they stop dismissing and start validating, it means they're building emotional capacity. They're stretching beyond defensiveness into compassion. And compassion is not something avoidants offer lightly. Then something happens that once would have felt impossible. They begin including you in their future. Avoidants live in the present moment strategically. The future implies permanence. Permanence implies vulnerability. So they keep things vague, undefined, flexible. But when someone starts saying next year and naturally includes you in the picture, that's not casual language, that's emotional integration. Maybe they talk about trips months ahead, maybe they mention events and automatically assume you'll be there. Maybe they speak in terms of we instead of I. That shift from independence to partnership is monumental. They're no longer guarding an exit door, they're building something with you in mind. And you can feel the difference. Future conversations don't feel hypothetical. They feel intentional. There's weight to them, stability. For someone who once avoided defining the relationship, even subtle future planning is a declaration, I see you here, I want you here. That's not something an avoidant says lightly. And finally, one of the strongest signs that an avoidant wants to change for you is this. They begin doing inner work. It may not look dramatic, they might not announce it, but you notice shifts in awareness. They reference things they've read about attachment. They reflect on past patterns. They say, I think I react that way because self-examination is uncomfortable for someone who survived by suppression. Looking inward means confronting emotions they've avoided for years. So when they start that process willingly, it means they've recognized something essential. They've recognized that the old way of coping is costing them connection. And maybe they don't say, I'm changing for you. Avoidants rarely frame it that way. But their actions tell you, their effort tells you, they're not just reacting to fear anymore, they're trying to understand it. And when someone who has always run from emotional intensity begins walking toward it slowly, imperfectly, but intentionally, that's transformation beginning. You have to understand how rare that is. Avoidants don't change because they're pressured. They don't change because they're criticized. They change when the value of the connection becomes greater than the comfort of their defenses. If they're consistent, if they're opening up, if they're validating your feelings, if they're planning a future with you, if they're reflecting on themselves instead of blaming everything outside of them, this is not coincidence. This means they see you as someone worth evolving for. And for a person who built their life around emotional independence, choosing growth for the sake of love is the deepest form of commitment they know how to give. The next shift is even more revealing. They begin apologizing without being forced. Not the defensive kind, not the I'm sorry you feel that way, not the apology that secretly blames you for reacting. A real apology. I hurt you. I shouldn't have shut down like that. You didn't deserve that. For someone who equates vulnerability with weakness, those words feel like exposure, because apologizing means admitting fault. It means lowering the shield. It means acknowledging they have impact. Avoidants often survive by staying self-contained. If they don't admit mistakes, they don't have to sit in shame. And shame is a feeling they've spent a lifetime avoiding. So when they apologize clearly, directly, without twisting the narrative, it's not just about the argument. It's about ownership. Ownership means they're no longer protecting their ego at the expense of connection, they're protecting the connection instead. And when you hear that kind of apology, something inside you softens, not because you needed to win, but because you needed to feel like you mattered. You needed to know that your pain wasn't invisible. That kind of accountability doesn't come easily. If they're offering it, it means they're stepping outside their comfort zone in ways they never have before. Then something subtle but powerful happens after conflict. They reach out first. In the past, arguments meant distance, silence, waiting. You were the one who broke the tension. You were the one who swallowed pride just to restore connection. But now they text. They call. They say, "Can we talk?" It may not be poetic. It may not be perfectly worded, but they initiate repair. Do you understand what that means for someone avoidant? It means they're prioritizing reconciliation over pride. It means sitting with the discomfort of unresolved emotion feels worse than the vulnerability of reaching out. And that is huge. Because for someone who defaults to self-protection, taking the first step back toward intimacy requires courage. It requires confronting the possibility of rejection. It requires admitting they care enough to fix it. When they bridge the distance themselves, they're telling you something without saying it directly. They're saying, "This connection matters more to me than being right." And if you've ever been on the receiving end of their silence before, you know how significant that shift is. It's not just about the text message. It's about what it represents. It represents fear of losing you. Another sign that change is real is when they tolerate emotional intensity instead of shutting down. You cry. You express fear. You speak from a place of deep vulnerability. And instead of freezing, deflecting, or withdrawing, they stay present. Maybe they don't know exactly what to say. Maybe they look uncomfortable, but they don't disappear emotionally. They don't mock your sensitivity. They don't retreat into silence. They sit there. For someone avoidant, emotional intensity can feel overwhelming. Their nervous system reads it as danger, so their instinct is to shut down, to detach, to create space. But if they're learning to sit through it with you, it means they're retraining their responses. It means they're teaching themselves that closeness doesn't equal catastrophe. You'll see it in their effort, the way they try to hold your hand, even if they're unsure, the way they ask, "What can I do right now?" That question alone signals growth. Because they're no longer escaping your emotions, they're participating in them. And when someone who once feared emotional depth begins wading into it with you, however clumsily, that's not temporary behavior. That's internal rewiring. Then you notice something quieter but deeply meaningful. They open up slowly but consistently. It's not a flood of vulnerability. It's not a dramatic confession. It's pieces, small pieces. A story about their childhood, a fear they've never admitted out loud. An insecurity they usually hide behind confidence. Avoidants don't trust easily. They don't expose themselves all at once. So when they reveal themselves gradually, over time, it means they feel safer with you than they felt before. Consistency in vulnerability is more powerful than intensity. If they share something personal and then continue sharing in the weeks that follow, it means they're not regretting their openness, they're building on it. And that tells you something critical. They're not just experimenting with closeness, they're choosing it. When someone who once insisted they didn't need anyone starts letting you see their fragile parts, it's because losing you would hurt more than being seen. And that's the shift. Finally, there's a sign that feels almost unbelievable when you experience it. They admit they're afraid of losing you. Avoidants rarely confess attachment fear. They prefer to appear unaffected, detached, independent. So when they say, "I don't want to lose this," or "I don't want to lose you," that's vulnerability at its purest form. It means they've acknowledged their own attachment. It means they've accepted that you matter deeply. And for someone who built their identity around self-sufficiency, admitting they care that much feels destabilizing, because caring means risk. But if they're willing to name that fear instead of hiding behind indifference, it means they've crossed an internal threshold. They're no longer pretending they could walk away unaffected. They know they wouldn't. And here's what you need to understand. An avoidant doesn't change because someone pressures them. They don't evolve because someone begs. They shift when they realize the connection is worth the discomfort of growth. If they're apologizing sincerely, if they're initiating repair, if they're sitting through emotional intensity, if they're opening up consistently, if they're admitting they don't want to lose you, this means something profound is happening inside them. It means they're dismantling a defense system that protected them for years. It means they're stepping into vulnerability, not because it feels natural, but because you feel worth it. And that kind of change is not surface level. It's transformation born from fear and chosen anyway. Even through fear, you begin to notice another shift that once felt impossible. They start breaking their "I don't need anyone" identity. This is subtle at first. It's not a dramatic confession. It's not them suddenly becoming overly dependent. It's the softening of a belief they've carried for years. Avoidants survive by convincing themselves they're fine alone, that needing someone is weakness, that depending on love creates vulnerability they can't control. But now, instead of saying, I'm just better on my own, they begin saying things like, I actually like having you here, or it feels good not doing everything alone. That sentence may sound simple, but for someone who built their personality around self-reliance, it's seismic, because identity is hard to change. It's one thing to adjust behavior, it's another thing to question who you think you are. When they start acknowledging that connection adds to their life instead of threatening it, they are rewriting a core narrative. You'll feel it in the way they lean into moments instead of stepping back, the way they allow you to support them instead of insisting they can handle everything themselves. That's not weakness, that's expansion. And when an avoidant expands instead of retreats, it means they are outgrowing fear. Then you begin to notice something that feels like partnership instead of coexistence. They compromise. Before, everything may have revolved around their comfort zone, their timing, their space, their boundaries, and you adjusted because you cared. But now, they adjust too. They rearrange plans to see you. They meet you halfway in disagreements. They consider your preferences instead of defaulting to their own. Compromise is intimacy in action. For someone avoidant, maintaining control creates safety. So compromising means loosening control. It means accepting that love requires flexibility. When they start saying what works for you, instead of deciding everything alone, they are shifting from independence to interdependence. That's a massive leap. Because true connection requires mutuality. It requires seeing the relationship as something shared, not something that fits conveniently into one person's life. If they are willingly adjusting, even in small ways, it means they're not just protecting themselves anymore, they're protecting what you're building together. Another powerful sign appears when they show up, even when it's inconvenient. Avoidants are comfortable with distance when emotions get complicated or life gets overwhelming. They retreat into work, into distractions, into solitude. But when they begin showing up despite discomfort, that's intentional love. They come over even after a long day. They call even when they're stressed. They sit with you even when emotions feel heavy. Not because it's easy, but because you matter. Love isn't proven in perfect conditions. It's proven when someone chooses presence over avoidance. When they push through their instinct to isolate and instead lean toward you, it means they're prioritizing connection over escape. And that changes everything. Because before, you may have felt like you were asking for too much, like your need for closeness was a burden. But when they show up without being forced, without being chased, it tells you something clearly. You are not too much. You are worth the effort. Then there's a moment that feels almost surreal. They begin expressing appreciation more openly. Avoidants often feel deeply, but they struggle to articulate it. Affection may have once been implied rather than spoken, but now you hear it. I appreciate how patient you've been. I'm grateful for you. You make my life better. Those words are vulnerable because expressing gratitude exposes attachment. It admits emotional reliance. When someone who once kept emotions guarded begins verbalizing appreciation, it means they are no longer afraid of revealing how much you impact them. And that matters, because feeling valued heals something inside you that distance once wounded. You no longer feel like you're guessing where you stand. You feel chosen, and being chosen by someone who once resisted closeness carries a different weight. It feels intentional, earned, real. And finally, the biggest sign of all, the one that ties everything together. They are uncomfortable, but they're trying. Change for an avoidant does not look smooth. It does not look effortless. It looks like hesitation before speaking. It looks like deep breaths before difficult conversations. It looks like awkward vulnerability and imperfect emotional expression. But they keep leaning in. They don't revert to old patterns without catching themselves. They don't run at the first sign of intensity. They may stumble, but they circle back. That's growth. Real change is not about becoming a completely different person overnight. It's about recognizing fear and choosing connection anyway. If you see them wrestling with themselves, if you see them choosing presence when distance would be easier, if you see them attempting to meet you in ways they never have before, this means something powerful. It means they're not just attached to you, they're evolving for you. And evolution is not casual. It's not convenient. It's uncomfortable. It requires dismantling defenses that once felt necessary for survival. If an avoidant is doing that, it's because losing you feels heavier than confronting their fears. And for someone who once believed they didn't need anyone, choosing to grow for love is the deepest commitment they can offer.